For 40 years, Miles Davis stood on stages around the world and turned his back to the audience. 40 years of walking away from thousands of people who'd paid to see him. 40 years of playing his trumpet while facing the band, the back wall, anywhere but the crowd. And for 40 years, critics, journalists, and fans had the same explanation: Miles Davis was arrogant. He was too cool to acknowledge his audience. He didn't care about the people who loved his music. They were all wrong. The truth that Miles's daughter wouldn't reveal until after his death. The truth that his closest friends kept secret for decades was that the coolest man in jazz history was also the most terrified, and what looked like arrogance was actually armor against a fear so overwhelming that it could paralyze him completely if he let it. It started in 1951 at a small club in Detroit. Miles was 25 years old, playing a late-night set to maybe 75 people. Not his first performance. He'd been playing professionally since he was 18. But something was different that night. Miles was about to start his solo when he made the mistake of looking out at the audience. Really looking. And suddenly, he could feel every single pair of eyes on him, could feel the weight of their expectations, their judgments, their attention. 75 people, all watching him, waiting for him to be brilliant. His hands started shaking. Not the usual pre-show nerves that every performer gets. This was different. This was his hands trembling so badly that he couldn't press the valves on his trumpet properly. His breath felt stuck in his chest. The room tilted slightly. Miles turned away from the audience, faced the drummer instead, and started playing. The moment he stopped looking at all those eyes, his hands steadied, his breathing returned. The music came back. When the set ended, Miles went backstage and threw up in a trash can. His bandmate found him there, pale and sweating. "You okay, man?" Miles wiped his mouth, tried to laugh it off. "Something I ate." But it wasn't something he ate. It was something he'd felt, and it terrified him because Miles Davis didn't do fear. Fear was for people who weren't sure of themselves, who didn't know their craft, who had reason to doubt. Miles knew he was talented. Miles knew he could play. But knowing that didn't stop the panic that gripped him when he looked at a room full of people, all staring at him, waiting for him to perform. At the next show, Miles tried an experiment. He played the entire set with his back to the audience, and he got through it without shaking, without the room tilting, without needing to throw up afterward. It worked, so he kept doing it. At first, people thought it was a temporary thing, an artistic choice for that particular gig. But Miles kept turning his back, show after show, club after club. Eventually, it became his signature, the way Miles Davis performed. The critics noticed immediately. Miles Davis, in a display of either supreme confidence or supreme contempt, played his entire set with his back to the crowd, wrote one reviewer in 1952. One gets the sense that Davis believes himself above the need to connect with his audience. Another critic was less generous. Davis's refusal to acknowledge his audience is the height of arrogance. We pay to see him perform, and he literally turns away from us. It's an insult. The narrative stuck. Miles Davis, too cool, too aloof, too arrogant to bother facing the people who made his career possible. Miles read the reviews, read every accusation of arrogance, every criticism of his supposed contempt for his fans, and he never corrected them, because explaining the truth, that he was terrified, that looking at a crowd made him physically ill, that the panic attacks were so severe he sometimes couldn't breathe, felt more humiliating than being called arrogant. So he let them think he was too cool to care. Better to be seen as arrogant than afraid. But backstage, before every show, Miles was fighting a battle that no one in the audience could see. His hands would shake as he got dressed. He'd pace in the dressing room, trying to calm his racing heart. Sometimes he'd throw up before walking on stage. Other times, he'd sit with his head between his knees, trying to breathe through the waves of panic. His band members knew. His close friends knew, but they kept his secret, because Miles asked them to, and because they understood that for someone with his reputation, the cool genius, the man too smooth to be rattled by anything, admitting to crippling anxiety would destroy the persona he'd built. "You can't tell people," Miles would say to his bandmates. "They won't understand. They'll think I'm weak." So his friends watched him suffer in silence, watched him throw up in trash cans and toilets, watched him pace and shake and fight for breath, and then watched him walk onto stage, turn his back to the crowd, and play like nothing was wrong. The irony wasn't lost on anyone close to Miles. Here was a man who could face racism, who could face the music industry's exploitation, who could face addiction and heartbreak, and every other hardship life threw at him. But facing an audience, that was the thing that broke him. "It doesn't make sense," Miles told his friend Herbie Hancock once, late at night after a show. "I know they're there to hear me play. I know they love the music, but when I look at them, all I can see is 1,000 ways to fail. Every face is someone who might be disappointed, someone who might leave thinking, I'm not as good as they hoped. And that feeling, that fear of disappointing people, it's bigger than anything else." Herbie asked the obvious question, "Have you thought about talking to someone, getting help?" Miles laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "And say what? Hi, I'm Miles Davis, and I'm afraid of the people who pay to see me. They'd lock me up." This was 1965. Mental health wasn't something people talked about openly, especially not successful black men in the entertainment industry. Anxiety, panic attacks, stage fright, these were weaknesses that could end a career. So Miles suffered through it, night after night, year after year, always with his back turned. The worst part was that turning his back helped with the panic, but created a different kind of isolation. Miles couldn't see his audience's reactions, couldn't see when people were moved by the music, couldn't see the woman in the third row crying, couldn't see the young musician in the back taking mental notes. All the feedback that most performers use to gauge their performance, the nodding heads, the closed eyes, the rapt attention, Miles couldn't access any of it. He played into a void, never knowing if he was reaching anyone. "Sometimes I wonder if they're even still there," Miles admitted once. "I play a whole solo with my back turned, and for all I know half the audience left. I can't see them, so they stop being real. It's just me and the music, and this wall I'm staring at." But he couldn't stop, because the alternatives facing the audience brought back that feeling of being crushed under the weight of all those eyes, all those expectations. Over the decades, the criticism continued. A 1975 review called Miles' Sage Presence, an exercise in narcissism. A 1982 article suggested that Miles turned his back because he cared more about the music than the people listening to it. They had it backward. Miles cared so much about disappointing people that he couldn't bear to look at them. His daughter, Cheryl Davis, grew up watching her father prepare for shows, watched him get physically sick before performances, watched him come home, exhausted, not from playing music, but from fighting his own mind for 2 hours. People would ask me, "Is your dad really that cool, that confident?" Cheryl said in an interview years after Miles's death, and I wanted to tell them, "My dad threw up before shows. My dad had panic attacks so bad he couldn't breathe. My dad was so scared of disappointing people that he couldn't look at them. But she kept his secret while he was alive, just like everyone else who knew, because Miles asked her to, because he was terrified that the truth would destroy the mystique that had become his shield. The turning point came in 1990. Miles was 64 years old and not in good health. He'd been struggling with respiratory issues, diabetes, a lifetime of pushing his body too hard. He knew, though he wouldn't admit it out loud, that he didn't have much time left. He was playing a concert in Paris, one of his favorite cities. The venue was packed, over 3,000 people. As always, Miles took the stage and immediately turned his back to the crowd. But something was different that night. Maybe it was knowing that he was running out of time. Maybe it was exhaustion from carrying this fear for 40 years. Maybe it was just being tired of running from something that had controlled his entire career. Midway through his second song, Miles did something he hadn't done in 4 decades. He turned around, faced the audience, and kept playing. His hands started shaking immediately. He could feel the old panic rising, could feel his breath getting tight. 3,000 faces all looking at him, all waiting for him to be brilliant. But he kept playing, and something happened that Miles hadn't expected. He saw people crying, actually crying, tears streaming down their faces as they listened to him play. He saw a young woman in the front row with her eyes closed, swaying gently, lost in the music. He saw an older couple holding hands, both of them smiling. He saw that young musician in the back, leaning forward, studying every note. For the first time in 40 years, Miles saw what his music did to people, saw that they weren't judging him, weren't waiting for him to fail. They were just grateful to be there, to hear him play, to share this moment with him. He played that one song facing the audience. Just one. Then he turned back around, because 40 years of anxiety doesn't disappear in 5 minutes. But for those 5 minutes, he saw what he'd been missing all along. After the show, backstage, Miles sat quietly for a long time. One of his bandmates asked if he was okay. "I saw them," Miles said. "I actually saw them, and they weren't scary. They were just people who love music." "You going to keep facing the audience?" the bandmate asked. Miles shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But at least now I know what I was running from. And it wasn't as bad as I thought." Miles Davis died on September 28, 1991, less than a year after that Paris concert. In the obituaries and retrospectives, many articles mentioned his habit of turning his back to audiences, usually describing it as a sign of his cool, aloof persona. It wasn't until several years later that Cheryl Davis decided to tell the truth. In a 1997 interview, she finally revealed what her father had struggled with his entire performing life. "My dad wasn't arrogant," she said. "He was anxious, severely, clinically anxious. In today's language, he probably had social anxiety disorder and performance anxiety. But in his time, there was no language for it, no treatment, no understanding. He turned his back, because looking at the audience triggered panic attacks, not little butterflies in your stomach nervousness, full panic attacks where he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't play. So he found a way to manage it, by not looking. And everyone called him arrogant for it. The revelation changed how people understood Miles Davis. Suddenly, that signature move, narrative turning his back, wasn't about contempt. It was about survival. It was about a man finding a way to do what he loved, despite a condition that should have made performing impossible. He could have quit, Cheryl said. He could have said, "I can't handle this," and walked away from performing. but he loved music more than he feared the panic. So he found a way to keep playing, turned his back. Yes, but he kept playing. Today, mental health advocates point to Miles Davis as an example of someone who accomplished extraordinary things while dealing with severe anxiety. Music schools teach his story differently. Now, not as a cautionary tale about arrogance, but as a reminder that sometimes what looks like confidence is actually courage. That sometimes the coolest person in the room is the one fighting the hardest battle. There's footage of that 1990 Paris concert. You can watch the moment Miles turns around, see the slight shake in his hands, see him forcing himself to keep playing, despite the visible fear. You can see the audience, completely unaware that they're witnessing something Miles hadn't done in 40 years. Just people listening to music, not judging, not critiquing, just experiencing. If you know what to look for, you can see tears in Miles's eyes as he plays that one song facing forward. Not from the music, from the relief of discovering, after 4 decades, that the thing he'd been most afraid of wasn't actually that scary after all. The story of Miles Davis turning his back isn't about arrogance or aloofness. It's about a man dealing with anxiety in the only way he knew how. It's about the masks we wear to hide our fears. It's about the courage it takes to keep showing up to do the thing that terrifies you, even if you have to face the other direction to do it. And it's a reminder that sometimes the person who seems the most confident, the most untouchable, the coolest person in the room is actually the person who's fighting the hardest just to stay in that room at all. If this story helped you understand that anxiety can affect anyone, even legends, even geniuses, even the coolest people you can imagine, please share it. Someone you know might be fighting their own battle, might be wearing their own mask. Subscribe for more stories that show the human side of icons, the struggles behind the cool personas, the truth behind the myths we tell about greatness.